Hey everyone, so today we're going to break down what happens when that nightmare scenario actually hits your home, a major water emergency. We're going to walk through the hidden dangers, the critical timeline, and the real science behind a professional restoration. Let's get right into it.
Just imagine that sound for a second. A sudden, awful rush of water where it absolutely shouldn't be. You know that moment of panic hits. You figure out how to stop the source, but the damage is already spreading. So what's the very first thing you need to understand? It's not about the mop and bucket, not yet. It's about the clock.
This right here is your critical window, 24 to 48 hours. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time, and honestly, in the world of water damage, it isn't. It's an absolute sprint against a much, much bigger problem that's just waiting to happen.
And yep, that problem is mold. As soon as that moisture soaks deep into your drywall, your subfloors, and especially your insulation, that 48-hour clock starts ticking. Because after that point, mold colonies can really start to establish themselves. And that's when a water problem morphs into a serious health and structural issue.
And this brings us to the first thing you absolutely have to get your head around. The water you can actually see is only a tiny fraction of the real threat. The real fight is against the moisture that gets trapped in all the places you can't see.
Right. And that's exactly why you can't just mop up the floor, point a box fan at the wall, and call it a day. Water is so sneaky. It wicks up inside drywall like a sponge. It soaks into the wood under your floors, and it gets trapped inside your wall cavities, creating this perfect, damp breeding ground for rot and mold.
Of course, you're gonna notice the obvious signs pretty quick. Things like those ugly, creeping water stains on the ceiling or walls, your paint or wallpaper starting to bubble up and peel, or that sinking feeling when you realize your hardwood floors are starting to warp and buckle. These are the big, loud alarm bells.
But here's what the pros are really looking for, the hidden dangers. The moisture that's trapped deep inside a wall, turning your insulation into a soggy, useless mess. That sudden spike in humidity that just makes the entire house feel clammy. And of course, that unmistakable musty smell. That's not just dampness, folks. That is often the very first sign of active mold growth.
So you can see how this all plays out in the real world. Let's take a look at a really specific case study. The town of Boerne, out in the Texas Hill Country, actually has this unique cocktail of risk factors that makes properties there especially vulnerable to water damage.
Now what's fascinating here is how the local geography basically creates a perfect storm. First off, Boerne is right in the middle of Flash Flood Alley. The local creek can overflow pretty easily. And the ground itself, it's mostly limestone and clay. It doesn't really absorb water well. So where does all that runoff go? Straight for people's homes. You add in that famous Texas humidity and you have a recipe for seriously rapid mold growth.
And check this out. It even comes down to how the homes were built. The older homes, a lot of those have pier and beam foundations. Great, but they can easily trap moisture in the crawl spaces, which leads to wood rot. But hey, even the newer homes on concrete slabs aren't totally safe. That shifting clay soil can actually crack the slab, letting groundwater seep right up from below.
Okay, so you're facing all these threats. How do professionals turn what feels like total chaos into a controlled, scientific process? Well, it's not magic, believe me. It's a very clear, methodical plan.
The whole professional process really boils down to just these three phases. First, you've got the emergency response, basically stop the bleeding. Second is the really careful drying and monitoring phase. And finally, you have the verification, which proves the job was actually done right.
Phase 1 is all about one thing: speed. Within just a few hours of getting the call, the goal is to get all of that standing water out. We're talking truck-mounted pumps, powerful extractors, anything to stop the water from absorbing any further into your home structure.
Now, in Phase 2, the science really kicks in. After the visible water's gone, they set up all this industrial-grade equipment, dehumidifiers, high-velocity air movers. But here's the key. They don't just guess when it's dry. Technicians use special tools like moisture meters and thermal imaging cameras to track the moisture levels inside the walls and floors every single day.
And all of that monitoring, it's guided by a super strict set of scientific standards. This isn't just about making things feel dry to the touch. It's about hitting specific, measurable, scientific targets. The first thing a professional crew does is classify the water itself.
Category 1, that's clean water, like from a busted supply line. Category 2 is what we call gray water. It might have some contaminants from, say, a dishwasher. And then you have Category 3, or black water. This is the bad stuff. It's seriously contaminated, coming from sewage or floodwaters. And this classification, it determines everything that happens next, from the safety gear they wear to which materials have to be completely torn out.
Now here's something you should know. The whole process is governed by a national standard called the IICRC S500. Think of it as the official rule book for the industry. It makes sure that a certified company is following proven steps for drying and decontamination, which protects you from shoddy work that could cause huge problems later on.
And these are the specific targets they're aiming for. It's not just dry, it's a number. For the wood framing in your walls, it has to get below 15% moisture. Any higher and you risk structural rot. For drywall, it has to be below 1%, because damp drywall is literally the perfect food for mold. This kind of scientific precision is the only way to be absolutely sure the problem is solved.
Okay, now that we've got the science down, let's switch gears and talk about the big, practical questions that every single homeowner has when they're standing in the middle of a mess like this.
And here it is. This is always question number one, right? You're looking at potentially thousands of dollars in damage, and the first thing that pops into your head is, am I covered?
So here's the usual breakdown. Insurance will typically cover damage that's sudden and accidental. You know, a pipe that suddenly bursts or a washing machine that overflows. What they generally won't cover is gradual damage, like from a slow leak you ignored for months. And this is critical. Damage from external floodwaters, like that creek overflowing we talked about, almost always requires a totally separate flood insurance policy.
The other thing everybody wants to know is, when can I get my life back to normal? I get it. The timeline can feel agonizingly slow, especially when you're out of your home.
Well, for a typical situation, the actual drying phase takes about 3 to 5 days after they've gotten all the standing water out. So you're usually looking at a 5 to 7 day process just for the initial cleanup and drying. And trust me, this is one part you cannot rush. Pulling the equipment out too early is the #1 mistake that leads to bigger problems down the road, like mold.
Which really brings us to our final thought here. After all the fans are gone and the floors look dry, the most important question is still hanging in the air, because restoration isn't just about removing the water you can see. It's about scientifically proving that you've removed the moisture you can see, making sure your home is truly safe and sound for years to come.